Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I am Matthew Lucas. Welcome. We post every week, so do hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing journeys.
Yes?
Stephen, what is this I see behind you? Look behind you.
Yes, it's a bit frightening really. We're going to talk about a whole group of plants that are known collectively as monocarps today.
Monocarps, which sounds like a fish with one hump, but I'm assured it's not.
No, it's not. A monocarp is a plant that flowers once and then dies and sheds its seeds. Now, you could in fact include annuals in the term of monocarp because that's exactly what they do. But it tends to be larger growing plants that will grow for some period of years, sometimes 3, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe like bamboos up to 100 years, and then they flower and they die.
So this, Stephen, this is a tragedy.
Well, it is a tragedy potentially, but it's like an operatic tragedy. I mean, you've got this amazing music going on for ages, and yes, and then
Traviata.
And it ends in the death of the heroine.
But rebirth. Well, let's go and have a look at more monocarps.
All right.
All right, Stephen, let's begin our monocarpic journey. This plant has the most extraordinary leaves, which grabs your attention as you walk past.
Yes, and your leg if you happen to get too close.
It does. It looks a bit Chiffid-like.
Yeah.
So, tell us everything.
All right. Well, this monocarp is an Echium. Now,
An Echium?
An Echium. Now, most people are familiar with the Pride of Madeira type Echiums.
Yes, which I wouldn't have thought was a monocarp.
No, it's not. It's shrubby.
Annually.
Yeah, not all monocarp, or not all genera include all the species as monocarps. So there'll be perennial ones, there'll be annual ones, and there'll be monocarpic ones. So the Echium genus is an interesting one. It comes from the old Greek, I think, for snakes, because it was thought to in fact be a cure for snake bite, and it supposedly keeps snakes away. So Viper's bug loss is one of the common names for the group. And of course many Australians will be familiar with one that's become seriously weedy here, Echium plantagenea, which we commonly call Patterson's curse. And so that is another Echium species.
I don't think I'm familiar with that, but anyway, I'll Google it.
Now, this particular one is Echium pininana. Now, Echium pininana is endemic to La Palma, the island of which the volcano has been erupting for some weeks now.
Oh, interesting. So not great news for the endemic species of Las Palmas.
No, it's a problem because this plant only naturally grows there. But having said that, it will naturally grow in anybody's garden given half a chance. Because what happens is it will grow for about 2 to 3 years. They often class it as a biennial, but this plant here is probably 18 months old now, and it will probably flower for me next spring, although it may send up a late flower this year, so you can never be quite sure when it all happens. The finale of these plants, when they send up their humongously tall flower spike,
which there's one over there we'll go and look at more closely.
We will have a closer look at that one. They can get up to around about 5 metres, they've been known to get to.
Wow, so which is what in the old measurement?
About 20 feet.
Goodness me, that's enormous.
Yeah, they can get really enormous. I've actually had one in the front of our house that you could look at the top of the plant through the upstairs window. So they can get enormously tall. I haven't got any really, really tall ones this year, and it does vary from year to year. But once the plant has flowered, the plant will set its seed, it will drop to the ground, and then it will germinate all over the place. And then I just go around and pull out the ones that are coming up where I don't want them.
So, quick question then. Would you say it's weedy? Is it a problem?
I'd be very surprised if it ever becomes weedy in most climates. I mean, there's always somewhere in the world where it could. It seems to grow best where there's disturbed soil. So if it's out in the bush where the soil is not disturbed.
It's a pioneer species.
It is a pioneer species.
I've
well
learned that
done.
from you.
Well done. So it's not likely to go out into the bush around me. Now, I've been growing it here for probably 10 or 15 years, and it pops up all over the place in the garden. I've yet to see one out in the bushland around me.
Yeah,
so
it's very manageable.
It's a very manageable plant. I will make one point of warning though, if you are handling these plants and pulling out the dead corpses of the ones that have finished flowering, they've got bristles on the stems that are like fiberglass. They'll go straight into your hand. So wear your welding gloves when you get rid of them.
Oh, no. Okay, we will. It actually feels quite prickly. So climatically, obviously Las Palmas is a Mediterranean climate.
Yep.
So
You could probably grow it in parts of Ireland, Cornwall, obviously the southern parts of the United States, but it wouldn't grow terribly well, I think, elsewhere.
Because it's not an annual, so it needs to be able to survive winter, and it's not
Yeah, to go on for that next one.
So saying though, you do get gentle frosts here.
Oh, yes.
I mean, sometimes snow,
Yes.
mild snow, and here it is.
Yeah, oh yeah, it'll cope with a modicum of cold.
Interesting. Well, let's go and look at the flowering one.
What a good idea.
Off you go.
Well, as you can see by this plant here, it has these beautiful soft blue flowers that come out of pinkish coloured buds, so you get this slight variation in colour in it. It's an absolute bee magnet. So it's a plant that's well worthwhile growing in your garden just for the fact that the bees will enjoy the pollen from the flowers. And of course the weedy one, Patterson's curse, which all Australians hate with a passion apparently, is absolutely loved by one small group of Australians, and that's the apiarists. So when they take their beehives out into the fields in northern Victoria, where there's masses of Patterson's curse, they get fabulous honey. Now, just another interesting little aside, when you've got the perennial shrubby Echium growing in the garden, Echium candicans, and you have Echium pininana in the garden, they will often cross. And here we have a hybrid of those two plants, which is now a more or less shrubby species, or shrubby form of the species. And you'll sometimes see a plant getting around in the trade, which is the hybrid, and they call it Cobalt Towers. Now, whether it's being grown clonally, I'm not sure, but this could fit under the umbrella of Cobalt Towers. So the old flower heads die, which I've unfortunately not removed out of the centre here, but it keeps sending up new ones from the bottom. So it'll go on as a perennial shrub. Well, as you can see, this one's quite tall, but it's not one of the biggest I've had in my garden. This one would be about 3.5 metres tall, I suppose, so sort of 10 to 12 feet tall. They can easily put on an extra metre or two with a really well-grown specimen. So if you want to outdo the Joneses, this might be the very plant for you.
Monocarp me. Is this a monocarp, Stephen?
This is in fact a monocarp. This is monocarp number 2.
Look at the size of those leaves. Goodness me.
It is one of those plants I can't live without. I just love it, love it, love it.
You can't live without this.
No, I can't live without this. It gives a wonderful tropical effect to a garden, and yet it is not a tropical plant.
Did we mention this in our tropical effect garden special?
We certainly did.
Oh, well, I'll link that video up here.
Yeah. Now, this plant comes from Madeira and maybe some of the other islands of the Azores.
Yeah.
And of course, our previous plant came from the Canary Islands.
Yes.
So they're all part of the island group called Micronesia. So there you
Which
go.
I did tease you about because that has cropped up in the past.
Yeah.
About the smoke bush, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Which we'll link here. And I said, Stephen, Micronesia's in the Pacific, but that's Micronesia as opposed to Macronesia.
Yeah. So the big Nesia is in another part of the world.
How interesting. All right.
So now we need to know about its name for a start.
Yes.
Now, when I first found this plant, it was actually a signature plant of Mount Massett in the area we live in.
Yes.
Nearly every big garden had some.
Yep.
But none of the gardeners knew what the name of it was, and they just used to call it Tree Angelica.
Right.
So that was the name that they gave it as the common name.
Yep.
They didn't have a botanical name. So I went to some effort with the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, taking down specimens and getting it ID'd. And when I first got it ID'd, it was called Thapsia decipiens.
Yes.
It then became Melanosolinum decipiens.
You've already lost me, but anyway, keep going.
Well, all right. And it has had another name change, but Melanosolinum, I'll explain a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what Thapsia meant, but Melanosolinum meant black parsley. And I guess it's in the parsley family, you know, carrot family, that Angelica family, the whole group.
Yes.
So it sort of made some sense.
Yep.
Recently, genetic work has been done, and they've counted chromosomes and genes and all those things they do.
Yes.
And they've found this to be very closely related to the common garden carrot.
Wow. Well, this is, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest carrot you'll ever see.
Yeah, yeah. So now it's a tree carrot. So it's botanical
Does
name.
it grows carrots on,
Yeah.
on an
No,
trees?
not really.
No.
But its name is now Daucus, which is the old Latin name, I think, for the carrot, for the wild carrot. So it's now Daucus decipiens. And it's interesting because decipiens means deceptive. So
Deceptive carrot.
It is a deceptive carrot. And it is an amazing plant. So
It is.
It does exactly the same thing that the Echium does in my garden. It self-seeds itself around once a plant goes to flower.
Yeah.
But you can never be quite sure when one's going to do that with this plant. So
You mean flower?
Yeah, as in flower,
Yeah.
because it will die after flowering, and it can do it when it's a 3-year-old plant. It could do it when it's a 15-year-old plant. So you can never be quite sure when it's going to go to flower.
Well, what do you think? Is it something to do with seasonality, with weather conditions that particular year?
I don't think so, because if it was weather conditions, then a whole pile of them would do the same thing.
It's just a whim.
It's just a whim of the plant. It might just be something genetic about the plant. I don't know. But I've seen
Interesting.
plants that are probably 15 or 20 years old and probably 3.5, 4 meters tall or more that will suddenly come into flower. And it's interesting, I find. And this is just something from, this hasn't been scientifically discovered, but
No peer-reviewed papers.
No peer-reviewed panel. But the higher up Mount Macedon you go, so into the higher elevation gardens on the mountain, the longer they seem to live before they actually set flower and then die, in general. So the bigger plants always seem to be in the older, higher altitude gardens. So I don't know whether that means anything, but that's just what I have observed.
There we are. Well, science is, half of it is observation, is it not? Now, it's got an interesting habit. So it's got basically a single trunk.
Yeah, it normally comes up in a single trunk, and then when it flowers, and we'll have a look at one that's in bloom, it looks like a giant parsnip gone to seed, and then it will set copious amounts of seed. They will sprinkle all over your garden if you don't sprinkle them by hand, and then you'll have them pop up all over the place, and you can again just pull out the ones that come up where you don't want them, leave the ones where you do. I quite like them in drifts. This one's come up of its own accord here. This was never
in a perfect
intended,
spot.
but it's great. And in fact, self-seeders are often like that. They'll often in fact sow themselves somewhere where somehow or another they just look right.
And these are actually, which we'll show our viewers, these are sort of on the outskirts of your large pond. And they do look very jungle watery. It's like the perfect spot for them. So they've chosen their own spot well.
Yeah, and you don't have to do anything to them. The only thing I do to them is when the leaves go yellow, I just give them a tug and pull them off.
Que bruta!
And that will leave another ring on the trunk as it goes up.
Yeah.
And those go in the compost. They compost down very well indeed.
Yeah.
And that just keeps the plant clean. So when you get a leaf that goes off, just discard it.
There you go. Now, given that it's from the Azores, ideal growing conditions.
All right, Mediterranean style conditions again, but it doesn't need to be out in hot and sunny aspects. It's quite happy in semi-shade. Needs a little bit of moisture because the Azores are not that dry.
Oh, okay.
So,
I know nothing about the Azores geography.
Yeah, and it may in fact do, well, it probably does do quite well in areas like Cornwall, Ireland, damper parts of California and slightly north, but it wouldn't want to be in the really cold and frosty areas. It certainly isn't going to go down to minus temperatures of any great degree. But it looks far more tropical than it actually is. So it suits me for my sort of gardening because it does give me that look.
It certainly does. Although, as you pointed out, it's further up Mount Macedon, which does get sub-zero centigrade temperatures and frosts and gentle snow.
Although, I don't know whether you're aware of this, Matthew,
Yes.
but anyhow, here's another little pearl of wisdom for you.
Yes.
When you go up high up onto a hill,
Yeah.
the frosts don't tend to settle as much on a high hill as what they do down in a valley.
Now, I've read that this frost sort of roll.
It does. It rolls down the hill, so if there's nothing to impede it, nothing to hold it back, it will end up in the valley, and you'll get your heaviest frost in the valley, and up at the top of the hill, it will still be cold, but it won't have settled frost.
Oh my goodness.
So there you go.
Oh, yeah, the lights are going off. I'm learning so much. All right, well, we should go and find one that's in bloom and look at the flowers.
Let's do that.
Okay, where?
Over here.
Okay.
Well, Matthew, here's one that I flowered earlier.
You prepared it. Now, as I'm seeing this, I can certainly see that carrotishness in the bloom.
It is very carrot-esque. Yes, let's not
Carrot-like.
go down. Yeah, carrot-like, yes. So you can see the family resemblance.
Yeah.
Now, the flowers themselves are great magnets for insects, so hoverflies, bees, beetles, all sorts of things will come in for the pollen and the nectar. And so it's worthwhile having them in the garden for that. But remember that they'll only flower every few years, or at least you may only have one in flower any given year.
Yeah.
And actually the reason for monocarpy is actually something we should discuss.
Yes.
Now,
as an evolutionary tactic.
Yes. If you were an annual and you flowered every year and shed your seed every year, you would then be putting a certain amount of seed back into the environment every year.
Yes.
If there is a mouse or a bird or a something or another that eats your seeds each year, they can build up to a critical mass where they will clean up most of your seed every year. But with monocarpy, if a plant actually only flowers irregularly, perhaps once every 5 to 10 to 100 years like a bamboo.
So nothing relies on its seed?
No, and you have this enormous seed shed. The animal hasn't time to build up quantities to clean up all the seed, so the seed actually gets a chance to germinate. So being a monocarp actually has quite a lot of advantages, in fact.
That's cunning, Second thing is, this is really big.
Yes, yeah.
It is a giant carrot. It is a striking plant. Now the other question then, does it always flower at the same time? So we're well into spring.
Yeah.
Would one decide to flower in autumn or
No, not as a rule. They do tend to flower if they're going to bloom in any given year. They do tend to flower at about the same time. So that sort of mid to late spring into the early summer, because you can see there's plenty of non-open flower heads on this plant. It goes over flowering for probably 2 months or more before it starts to set seed, and then all the leaves die and drop off, and then the whole plant starts to senesce.
Now, which is a polite way of saying die.
Yes, exactly.
Now the trunk, I mean, it looks like a shrub. That's a very shrubby trunk.
Yeah, it's a quite large, solid looking trunk, but it's actually hollow inside. So it's only an outer rim of woody tissue with the bark on it.
And all that moisture is... Yeah. Well, this is extraordinary, and I have seen this plant around a lot, but I have never seen it in bloom. So that is amazing. Thank you, monocarp giant carrot. Okay, what's next?
All right, we'll go to monocarp number 3.
Off we go.
Well, Matthew, monocarp number 3.
It is enormous.
And not finished yet.
No, so we will take footage when it is in bloom and overlay that so you can see what it's going to look like. So what's this one?
All right, this one comes from Mexico.
Yeah.
It's in a genus called Furcraea.
Furcraea?
It's named after Antoine Francois...
Furcraea?
No, Furcraea.
Oh.
I'll try and get my French pronunciation correct. He was a famous naturalist and chemist he was born in 1755. He became one of Napoleon Bonaparte's offsiders and advisors, and he had some very interesting things to say about chemicals and all sorts of things in his lifetime.
Wow.
He was made a count on the day he died in 1809. Yeah, it does. It's those posthumous things that I find really weird.
His wife may have been happy.
Yeah, well, she might have been if he had one. I don't really know that much about him.
There was no countess.
There might not have been a countess, but he was a fairly important character. Now, this genus is closely related to the argives.
I was going to say, because they are also all monocarp, aren't they?
No.
No?
No, because a lot of argives, although the main crown will die after flowering, they produce offsets. So
that doesn't count.
It doesn't make them a monocarp because the whole plant hasn't died. It's produced these baby plantlets
Is there
around.
a word for that?
Probably. I'll find it out for you later. No, this plant, when it flowers, completely dies.
Right.
This one is about 8 to 10 years old.
Yeah.
It will be 25 feet or more in the old measurements by the time it's finished going up into the air.
It is enormous now.
It has little greeny white bells, and it has an interesting way to procreate.
Yeah.
In that it will produce its flowers and seed just like a lot of normal plants will, but in amongst the branches of that huge big candelabra of flowers, it produces little bulbils on the stem. So they're little vegetative plantlets.
Right.
And when the stem dies, the plantlets just drop off and fall to the ground.
Right.
And will take root and
Does it
start
produce
again.
seed as well, though?
Yeah, yes, it'll still produce seed, so it will procreate that way as well.
A bed each way.
Well, exactly. So you will end up with enough Furcraeas to sink your whole garden if you keep all the bulbils that will come off it. But for 8 to 10 years, it's this huge, big grey-green yucca type plant to look at, and then suddenly the top will start to get all a bit malformed and you think, oh, is it got some sort of nasty rot or something? And then suddenly this huge spear will come up through the middle, and so you end up with this incredible statuesque thing. Just to give you some sense of scale on just how big a Furcraea can grow, here we have a house. We have my stepladder leaning against the Furcraea, and the Furcraea just keeps going up and up and up and up. It seems to go on forever. So what an incredible plant it is. It will be an issue when it dies completely, because it's going to be really hard to get rid of the corpse because it's so huge.
And it's quite woody too.
Yeah, it is quite woody.
So it's literally like chopping down a tree. Yeah,
kindling, perhaps.
So have you had one bloom before?
This is the first one in our garden.
You're very excited.
This is the first death of a Furcraea in my garden.
Celebrating death. Yeah, well, it was Halloween last weekend.
Yeah, well, exactly. So it goes out with a bang, I have to say. And although I'm going to miss it, I've got another young one that I've planted in another part of the garden. Yep. When this one goes, I may well plant one of its plantlets back in its place. And then I can live for another 8 to 10 years to wait for it all to happen again.
Now, Mexican, so ideal growing conditions.
Mediterranean to dryish climates suit it well. It's not overly cold hardy, so it probably wouldn't grow outdoors in parts of England and things. So I would keep it to the sort of Mediterranean sort of climate areas. But it's a very dramatic and strange and wondrous plant. There's only, I think, 22 species in the genus. They're all restricted to the Mexican sort of area. I think some of them go a little further south and a couple a little further north. And they're not all monocarps. This is one of the few monocarpic ones. Wow. And it's Furcraea. Well, I bought it as Furcraea bedding housei. If Kew Botanic Gardens is to be believed, and it was bedding housei.
They are.
Yes, of course they are.
They are the font of all knowledge.
They are now saying it is Furcraea parmentieri. So if I got the right name to start with, that's probably what it should be now.
Right.
And yes, many of them work like the agaves and produce plantlets around the side, so become properly perennial. But this particular species is certainly a monocarp.
It's 100% monocarp.
Well, there you go. And it's a group of plants that a lot of people don't know about, don't understand. Rather worry about if you suggest they buy one, because you're selling them something that's going to die in a few years.
Born to die, as Lana Del Rey said. Well, that seems like a great way to end our monocarp epic.
Well, it certainly does, because it's quite an epic monocarp.
It really is. It is an epic monocarp. What could we possibly do to trump this spire of brilliance?
Next week, I don't know, but we may go to the other extreme. Who knows? Let's talk about alpine plants or something.
Do you have alpine plants?
Oh, the occasional ones, yes.
We do post every week, so do hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to hear of our continuing adventures. And Stephen, we look forward to seeing each other and you next week.
Fantastic. See you then.